Now we're going to learn about animation in Max. Animating in Max is very straightforward. Most of it happens along the bottom of the screen. There's a timeline, which allows you to scrub through time, and a couple of buttons here that allow us to set keys. Let's start with some very simple animation. Let's just move an object around. I'm going to create a cylinder. Go ahead and create one. I'm going to bring up my perspective viewport. Now, in order to animate something, we need to set keys. The first way you set keys is through the Set Key toggle. Now, this allows us to set a key just by hitting that big key button. Now, notice how, as I toggle the Set Key on and off, the border of this screen turns red. That tells us we're ready to set some keys. Go ahead and set a key. And I can move it, move the timeline, and then move the object, and I can set another key. And there we go. I've set two keys. Now notice how we've got two little bars here on what we call the track bar. And these are basically our keys. If you right-click on one, it'll tell you all the things that were keyed. Now in this case we have cylinder position, but it also keyed rotation and scale even though we didn't modify those. Why is that? Well, over here next to the Set Key button we have a dialog called the Key Filters dialog, and that tells us when I hit this set key, what am I going to key? So if I just hit position, then it would only key the position. If I hit rotation, scale, whatever, it'll key those attributes of that object. So if I just did a key of rotation, then I could rotate this object here, set the key, but since we have a key set here already, it's going to go back. Now also notice there's a little handy guide here. In fact, let me go ahead and key just a position key so you can see something over here. Notice how these little, I don't know if you can see this, but each one of these is a different color. The rotation key is green. The position key we just set is red. And these ones that have all three of them are red, green, and blue, blue being scale. If we want to, we can adjust the keys just by clicking them and moving them. So if I want that to happen sooner, if I want that rotation to happen right away, I can go ahead and do that. If I want to move this up. So this is a very easy way to slide groups of keys around. Now when I slide these around, I'm sliding around all of the keys. I can also manage keys by right-clicking on each individual key, and I can delete keys, or I can delete all the keys or just individual keys. I also have an option to filter different types of keys, and some configurations here for the timeline, such as show frame numbers and so on and so forth. Now if I want to get rid of a key, let's say I don't want it to rotate, all I have to do is highlight that key. I can also click and drag a bunch of keys, and I can just hit the delete button and my keys are pretty much gone. So that's set key. Auto key is different in that as soon as you move the object, it creates a key. So as soon as you do something, it's going to make a key for the object. You don't have to explicitly hit the set key button. So if I wanted to move the object, I simply move it, and notice how as soon as I move it, the key appears. Now this is a much faster way to animate, but you got to be careful because every time you touch the object, you're actually making keyframes. Of course, undo can help a lot with this, and this is good for a lot of situations. But you do have two ways, so you can find out which method works best for you. Also notice how when I'm using auto key, it's only creating red keys here. It's not creating keys for everything. It only creates keys for the parameters that were affected. So if I rotate this object here, I'll get a red and green key, but it's not going to rotate back because I'm not setting a rotational key until I actually move the object. There's also other ways of creating keys. We can key pretty much anything. We can animate pretty much anything in Mac. So I'm going to go over to my Modify panel. And one of the things we can animate is these parameters controlling the shape of the cylinder. So, for example, I could change the radius of the cylinder and the height. And notice how as soon as I click and drag that, I'm going to undo that. As soon as I click and drag this, a little red bar shows up around the parameter. Why is that? Well, it's because I've turned on auto key, and so any change to anything in Macs gets keyframed. You got to be very careful with this. So now it shrinks. If I want, I can make it grow again as it comes back. Exchange the height. And now notice these keys here, these parameter keys, they're gray. So I've keyed the radius and the height, position, as well as radius and height. So there's a lot of different keys going on here. We can key modifiers as well. In fact, I'm going to delete some of these keys. Grab them, hit the delete key. Let's say we want to do our classic bend. Well, if I leave auto key on, I can create keys to bend the object. So that's fairly straightforward. And again, the keys will show up here as well. Now, playing back your animation is fairly simple. You just have a play button. Now, this may or may not play in real time. Depends a lot on how good a video card you have and also how complex the shot is. You can hit rewind. You can go all the way to the start, go all the way to the end, so on and so forth, just like in any videotape recorder. And we also have a couple of configuration options here. We have our time configuration. Now that allows us to set our frame rate, allows us to display our time in frames, SMPTE, frames and ticks, and so on and so forth. Do we want to play back in real time? And also our start and end time. So if I want to make my animation longer, I can go ahead and, let's say I want it to be 120 instead. Then I have 120 frames of animation. This is also where you can scale time. You got to be careful though when you're scaling time, because it will give you keys that are not aligned to the frame. So you have subframe keys, and this is where you get into frames and ticks and that sort of thing. We're not going to get into that. We'll just deal with frames today. So that's the basics of animation, but of course you want to have more control over your keyframes and stuff. There's a couple of ways of doing. First of all, you can just click here, and that'll open up a little curve editor. Now this gets into track view, so we're going to go ahead and cover that in our next movie.